Those of you that are regulars with us, you might be wondering, who's that guy up there in that suit? I don't usually wear the suit, but my wife told me if I'm going to ask the confirmands to dress up, then I have to set the example. So I woke up this morning and this was laid out for me, and I'm just following orders. So it's wonderful to have you here. As Scott said earlier, to all the families that are guests with us today, welcome. It's so good to have you with us for such an incredible celebration. But today, we're in a sermon series, a 10-week-long sermon series, and it's called Religious Myths. And what we're saying is there are things said throughout Christianity that either just aren't true or there needs to be a lot more explanation with them because it's either we're misquoting a Bible verse or we got the whole concept wrong. And today what we're going to talk about is the myth of following your heart. This is something that Christians say all the time. Well, you'll know what to do. Just follow your heart. Trust your heart. We say it a lot of different ways, but it's this concept that somehow our heart is going to lead us to the right decision. That inside of us, there's this innate good nature that knows the right decision, and we just need to follow our hearts. And so we're going to talk about that today and talk about 3 lies that come out of that concept. But to begin, I want to tell a story. My wife, Joe, and I, we were dating at the time in St. Louis, and we were flying to my home in Fort Myers, Florida, and there was this cheap budget airline. I think it was called the USA 3000. It was like $10 to get on the plane, and that was all you had to pay. And then if you wanted like a seatbelt, that was another $5. I mean, it was like one of those, like if you want to use the bathroom, that's another $5. So literally, as a poor college student, I could get home for like $15. So we were on this airlines. We were flying down to Fort Myers. And we get close to Fort Myers, Florida, and if you've ever been to Florida, they have some wicked storms that just pop up out of nowhere. So he gets on the radio, the pilot does, and he says, hey, there's a big storm over the airport. We're going to have to circle for a little bit. He didn't say, we're going to fly right through the storm that is going on and circle that we're waiting on. So we are in the middle of this storm in this rickety old, probably 40-year-old jet. I think bolts are coming loose and stuff. I mean, it is just rocking us. And everyone's getting a little uncomfortable, a couple screens on the big bumps. And I'm just like, this is not good. So we're in the middle of this storm. It's rocking. We're just circling, waiting for them to let us land. And all of a sudden, the pilot comes over and he goes, hey, guys, we typically only put enough gas to get where we're going. So we're actually running low on fuel right now. So we're going to have to divert to Sarasota and fuel up. So we get out of the storm, and everyone's dead quiet because at this point, he said, we're low on gas. So everyone's just thinking, let's just get on the ground. So Sarasota's airport is right on the water, right on the Gulf. And so we're getting lower, and we're getting ready to land. And all of a sudden, red lights start flashing, and this electronic woman's voice comes on. And she says, prepare for water emergency. Prepare for water emergency. You could hear a pin drop. Everybody was looking around like, is that a joke? What's going on? And all of a sudden the pilot jumps on the radio again. He's like, disregard that. Don't worry about that. He said, we're just really low to the ground because we're about to land. Everything's fine. We have enough gas. We're fine. So we land and we get gas and everything. And sure enough, everything was fine. But it was pretty jarring to be on the plane during that. And what happened was the plane has a automatic equipped warning system. They were not where they were supposed to be. They were low to the water. Automatically, that triggers water emergency. There are these innate systems within the plane that react to something going malfunctioning. And so this automatic response came on. And the thing is in our lives, we have these internal warning systems too. We have, you can call it lots of things, following your heart or trusting your heart. Some people call it trusting your conscience or trusting your gut. We have this innate idea that inside of us, there's this trustworthy moral compass that will sound alarms when something's not right or guide us left or guide us right, that it will say, hey, warning, you need to do this or that. And we trust this. We trust this internal system to say, what you're telling me is right and I should act in it. And so whatever it's called, following your heart, trusting your gut, whatever you want to call it, we all sometimes lean on it. How many of you have ever made a decision based on what your heart felt? Where you've said, you know what, my heart's just, I just feel in my gut, this is what I'm supposed to do. And here's the question, is that accurate? Is that an accurate way to make a decision? Is that an accurate way to say that is trustworthy? And we can even Christianize this. Sometimes we put a Christian spin on things to justify things. We can say, well, you'll feel at peace in your spirit with that decision. And that's our Christian way of saying this is God ordained. If you feel at peace in your spirit, then it's a good decision. But all of it centers around the same idea that there's this internal, trustworthy compass that is going to guide you. And the question is this: can we really rely on that? Is that really a trustworthy thing to do? I mean, we lean on it a lot, and we said earlier, how many of you have made a decision based on what you felt in your gut? How many of you have made a heart decision on somebody you should have dated that afterwards you were like, whoa, that was a mistake. Heart was wrong on that one. I have those stories. How many of you have chased after something and said, I want this, I love this, I want this, whether it's a house or a car, I love this car, I love this house, I love this job, and all of a sudden it steers you wrong. We can understand that our hearts can lead us astray. But what we're going to tackle is in this concept, there's really 3 lies that we need to tackle. And the first one is this: if our heart longs for something, it must be right. If our heart longs for something, it must be right. In our text today from Jeremiah, it said this. Jeremiah was a prophet in the Old Testament 1,000 years before Jesus, and he wrote this, inspired by the Lord. He wrote this phrase: the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And what's interesting about it is Jeremiah is talking about the human condition, that all of us, our hearts will lead us astray. They are deceitful. You cannot trust them. And what's interesting, he says it's even beyond cure. This isn't something that once you become a Christian, your heart's going to always guide you in the right decisions and right ways. He's saying it is always going to be like this. Your heart is always going to be deceitful. Your heart is always going to have ulterior motives. Your heart cannot be trusted. Not all the time, but it cannot be trusted in everything. And it's without cure. You can't understand how your heart works. You have made decisions before that you step back and go, why in the world did I make that decision? Because your heart longed for it. And so the first lie that we have to tackle is, if our hearts long for something, it must be right. It's just not true. And throughout the Bible, we see this. You go to the very beginning of the Bible, God creates Adam and Eve, 2 people, the first 2 people. They're living in a perfect garden. Everything is perfect. They're naked. They're unashamed. It's a beautiful life. And then Eve listens to a snake that says, eat from that one tree that God told you not to eat from. And she grabs the fruit and she eats it. And I want to pause for a second, and I want you to put yourself in Adam's shoes. He is looking Eve, the love of his life, the only other person on earth, in the eyes. And she's handing him the fruit. And he knows that God has said, don't do it. And he has a choice. Who do I love more? Do I love God more? Am I going to do what God said? Or do I look this woman in the face who I love, who is my partner, and say, you're on your own. You made a bad choice. His heart chose Eve. In that moment, that was his decision. And throughout the history of the Bible, we see people make heart decisions that are just wrong. One of the interesting stories, how many of you have heard the story of Samson and Delilah? Samson, one of the strongest men God has ever made. He killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. And it's not a fairy tale. He did this. Strongest man God has ever made. But the reason he was strong was God said, you are never to drink alcohol and you are never to cut your hair. So long as you obey that command, I will give you strength. So then he falls in love with a woman named Delilah. Delilah is a Philistine. She's an enemy to God's people, the Israelites. But he falls in love with her all the same. And so they are together, and he's in love. And she says, tell me how you get to be so strong. How can you be like everyone else? And the Philistines are offering her tons of money to find out the answer to this, because he's killed thousands of them. And he lies to her. And so she ties him up the way that he said, and then she yells, the Philistines are coming, and he comes in, and he rips it open, and he kills them all, and she goes, you lied to me. She does this 3 times, says, you're making a fool of me. Tell me how you are so strong. Tell me how you can be defeated. And each time he tells her a lie, she tries it, so he knows she's untrustworthy. And then in one of the most crazy scenes in all the Bible, she asks him again, and she says, if you truly love me, tell me how you can be defeated. And in one of the most puzzling scenes, he tells her the truth. He knows she hasn't proved him trustworthy in everything that he's told her in the past. But for some reason, he tells her, if you shave my head, I'll be just like every other man. And so in the middle of the night, she shaves his head. And the Philistines come in, and he's not strong enough to defeat them. And they gouge out his eyes, and they torture him. And the thing is we step back and we go, Samson, why? Why would you tell her? Why would you disobey God? Why would you do? Because the heart is deceitful above all things. The heart will lead you astray. You have the famous story of King David and Bathsheba. He's up on his balcony in his palace, and he's looking down at his town. And they used to have bathtubs on the roofs. Didn't make a lot of sense, but they did. And Bathsheba, a beautiful woman, is bathing on her roof. And King David, who knows he shouldn't be looking, knows he shouldn't go there, sees her, invites her up to his palace, sleeps with her. The heart is deceitful above all things, and it will lead you to no good. You look at the story of the Israelites. They have God with them. God is literally among them. And yet they will choose multiple times to go and worship the gods of the people around them because their gods have more fun. Their gods listen to them. And so they love the idea of being in control. They want the gods of the other people because their gods do whatever they tell them to do. And so they start worshiping the other gods because they want a God that gives them control and they can manipulate. They love the control, and their heart leads them astray. You look at the story of Jonah. Jonah hates the Ninevites, and God says, go and tell them about me and save them. And Jonah says, my heart tells me that they deserve justice, not forgiveness. I'm going to withhold that forgiveness. His heart tells him wrong. You go to the New Testament, and you have Jesus interacting with the rich young ruler. And he says, the rich young ruler says to Jesus, what must I do? And he says, get rid of all your rich stuff and follow me. And the rich young ruler leaves going away sad, because he loves all of his stuff over following Jesus. The heart is deceitful above all things, and it cannot be cured. Even today, we can point throughout history and throughout our friends and throughout our families, you can say, that person is being led by their heart, and it's going bad for them. And so, the one thing that we have to understand about our hearts is this. The big confusion is this. It is you who sets the warning systems in your heart. It is you that sets the standards of your heart. It's kind of like air conditioning. In our house, our air is set at 72 degrees. That is the point that both of us can survive. That's the compromise of where we meet. At 72, I am on the verge of sweating to death, not quite there yet. And at 72, my wife is on the verge of hypothermia, but not quite there yet. That's the one place we can meet. Now, here's the thing. Thermostats do not define hot or cold. We do. It's the same setting. I think it's hot. She thinks it's cold. And if I were to call some AC repairman in and say, hey, it's not working, it's at 72, and I'm hot and she's cold, what is that dude going to do? He's going to look at me and go, you're an idiot. That's not my problem. That's you. That's you. And here's the thing. If we understand this right, our hearts, we set the standards we choose. We determine when it kicks in and when it stays idle. Our heart doesn't our hearts don't tell us when we are violating God's law. Our hearts tell us when we are violating our own standards. Our hearts are our own to control. And so what that means is two big lies that we still have to tackle. The second lie that we have to tackle is this. If we control the standards of our heart, then if your heart struggles with something, it must be wrong. This is a lie. If your heart struggles with something, sometimes we say, well, I don't feel right about that, or my heart's telling me no, so it must be a wrong thing. And that's not necessarily true. In the Bible, there's a story about Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's a famous man in the Bible named Abraham. And Abraham has his nephew Lot living in Sodom and Gomorrah. In Sodom and Gomorrah, it's a town of wicked sexual debauchery. They have gang molestation and gang rape going on throughout the city, and it's just become a custom that that's what they do. It's a deplorable city that's going on. And Abraham is talking to God directly, and God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, whoa, I don't feel good about that. I don't feel good about that. He said, what if there was 50 righteous people? Would you spare the whole city? God says, okay. He says, what if there was 20? God says, okay. He says, what if there was 10? God says, okay, if there are 10 righteous people, I'll spare the city. But otherwise, they get justice. And Abraham just still doesn't feel good about it. But it doesn't mean it was wrong. And in one of the most interesting verses of the Bible, this happens the next day, Abraham. Early the next morning, Abraham got up. This is right after Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed the night before. And returned to the place where he stood before with the Lord, where he was talking with God, pleading with him. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw the dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. And what's interesting is, this is the only place in the Bible where Abraham appears but doesn't say a word. Every other time that Abraham appears in the Bible, he's speaking and talking. In this moment, he stands there looking at the smoldering ash, and there's nothing to say. It doesn't mean he's okay with what God did. It doesn't mean he feels good with it in his heart. But he has to understand that that's what God did. And there are times that we can trick ourselves if we think if our heart's struggling with something, it must be wrong. Because a lot of times it comes to discipline and justice, doesn't it? There's a lot of times, whether it's your spouse or your family or your wife is your spouse, your kids, your coworker, where you know something needs to be done, but you don't feel right about it, so you back out. And God's saying, no, your heart is deceitful above all things. There are times that you need to trust, that you need to do the right thing, even if you don't feel good about it. Do the right thing. And on the flip side is this lie. If your heart has no problem with something, it must be okay. How many of you is that you? How many of you have made decisions saying, well, I didn't feel bad about it, so it must have been good? Because clearly if it was a bad decision, I would have felt bad about it. You know, it's kind of like this. What you are doing is you are literally leaning on yourself as your own trustworthy moral guide. You're saying, within me is the answer to what is right and wrong. It's kind of like this. The difference between my wife and I. See, if we were to go to Disney and they tell us that 2-year-olds get in free, 2 and under, I would be telling my 6-year-old, my 4-year-old, and my 2-year-old that they're all 2 years old and we're going to take a chance at it. That's just me. I'm looking at 50 other thousand people that are walking in paying a ticket. I really don't want to pay a car payment for each one of them to get in. I'm already going to have to pay $20 for a bottle of water and $50 for a little Mickey ears hat. You know, I'm like, they're going to get their money. We're going to beat the system. And I have no problem with it. I'll stick it to the man. I got no problem. That's my heart. My heart is calloused that way. My wife, if they were trying to let my 4-year-old in for free, she would be like, oh, no, she's 4. We got to pay for her. Like, that's my wife. She would not let that happen. Even if we got the pass, she wouldn't take it. And here's the thing. Your heart can become calloused to what you do throughout the years. You can justify things to yourself. I can justify shorting Disney $250. I got no problem with that. I can justify it, and here's the thing. I can even put spiritual words on it. I can say, you know what? God calls me to be a good steward of my money. And the best use of my money is not wasted there. I'll use it to glorify God some other way, and I'll save $250 by not paying for my kids. We play that game all the time, where we don't feel bad about something, and we justify something, and we put a little Christian words on it, and all of a sudden we can walk away. Because if our heart has no problem with it, then it's okay. Our heart is our moral compass. But here's the thing. You set the standards of your heart. You do. You know, it's kind of like the first time you were driving with your license and you ran a yellow light and you felt really, really bad. You know, that first time you looked for cops, you're like, oh my gosh, I bet I'm getting arrested. I just ran my first yellow light. Now that you're an adult and you run a yellow light, how many of you weep? How many of you care? How many of you are like, I run red lights? Your heart can become calloused to things throughout the year. But here's the thing. There's good news and there's bad news with this. And here's the good news. As we can see, your heart is easy to reset. Your heart is easy to reset. You can look through your rearview mirror and identify attitudes and actions you used to think were wrong that now you don't have the slightest bit of guilt about, right? And you can look in the rearview mirror, and the same goes for the other side. You can see things that you thought were okay that now that you frown upon. So your standards can change. For those of you that are sports fans, you can hate a certain team, and then all of a sudden they draft one of the Huskers, and you're like, oh, now I got to root for them. Your heart can change like that. And that's good news. Because God says, you need to change your heart. You need to realign your heart. Learn what I want your standards to be for your heart and mold and shape it. And the good news is it's really easy. All you have to do is learn what God would want, and your heart can change like that. And you can have those standards. And here's the bad news that comes with it. The bad news is this. If you believe in this lie, it'll set you on a course to face God's wrath. Here's what I mean. I've been a pastor for 7 years. I've counseled all kinds of people throughout the years. There's one type of person I have never been able to counsel that despite my years of working, it has never worked to break through to them. Do you know who that one person is? The person that believes that they were right in their heart. The person that I can look at and say, this Bible verse says you're wrong. God himself says you're wrong. And the person looks at me and goes, no. I was right in my heart. I know I was right. I did the right thing. My heart tells me so. My internal compass tells me I was right. That there's justification, there's reasons. I was right. I've never been able to break through to that person. How many of you have that stubborn person in your life that if they got it in their mind and their heart that they were right, there's no breaking it? And what happens is you set yourself up for a life with no remorse, where you do not feel sorry for what you've done, and you have set yourself on a path to face God's wrath for what you've done. But the good news is that your heart can easily change if you want it to. And you can realign yourself to what God would desire, and you can understand the principle here that when you have decisions to make, when you're deciding right and wrong, your internal compass is not what you should be leaning on. It should be God's word. That feeling good about something or trusting something or my heart thinks I should go left, that is not what you should lean on. That you would trust in God. And so the beauty of that is this. We get to go before God in a time of confession right now, where we get to go before God and say, God, I too often am leaning on my own moral compass instead of yours. And so I want to invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes and join me in a time of confession now. Heavenly Father, we come before you and we thank you for the incredible God that you are, that you intricately made our bodies, not just our organs and our skin and all of our systems, but you give us emotions. You give us all of our blessings, Lord, and you even give us our warning systems that tell us right and wrong. Lord, we pray that we would align our warning systems with your word, that our standards for life would be your standards for our life. And Lord, where we have messed that up, let us confess to you now. Where we have made our own decisions rather than the decisions you would want, Lord, let us confess that to you now. Where we have hurt others and made a mess of our lives, let us give that to you now. Lord, we come before you, and for everything that we've made a mess of, we ask for forgiveness. For all the people we have hurt, all the things we have said that we wish we could take back, we ask you to forgive us. And for all the times that we have disappointed you and failed to do what you would have us do, we ask for forgiveness In the name of your Son, Jesus. And all God's people said, amen.